Too. Been a long time.
All right, you guys, we're about to start the program. So Abby's going to begin with the introduction and we're going to start the recording.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Friedman, and today I am pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Stephanie Swann. But first, from Valerie and Joni, thank you for all each of you did in the November election. Jewish Democratic Women's Salon was founded to bring together, educate, empower, and engage progressive, like-minded Jewish women in our local community. And that's exactly what we did, but we're not finished. The 2 Senate runoff races are critical, and we'll need all the support we can offer. To do that, we need to find ways of recharging while caring for ourselves. To that end, we've asked Dr. Swann, Stephanie, to give us an overview of what mindfulness meditation is, how it impacts our central nervous system, and how each of us develop our own practice. Stephanie is one of the founders of the Atlanta Mindfulness Institute. She's a psychologist, and as someone who's taken several of her workshops to develop my own meditation practice, I can enthusiastically attest to how much it's helped me maintain balance during the roller coaster ride of the past 4 years. Thank you for being here virtually, Stephanie, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Abby. And just a deep bow of gratitude to each of you. This sounds like this is a very action-oriented group, and for the celebration that we have been able to have, even though it rests in a lot of uncertainty still. I thank you genuinely, and it's good to be here with you. So I do want to start with acknowledging the context in which we meet today. But actually before that, I'd like us just to pause. One of the most action-oriented aspects of mindfulness is pausing. And I just invite us to pause right now as each of us arrives here, just to really see who's with you on this call, to notice who showed up, who is supporting you in friendship and work. And I think when we do pause and really see, it has a way of inviting appreciation in when we really slow down and take a look. So thank you. So now that maybe we've yoked together a little bit as a community right now, we can acknowledge with maybe a little less stress the uncertainty that we sit in. When we're sitting in it with others, it makes it a little more manageable. But just to name, that even though many of us may be celebrating, we're still sitting in a lot of uncertainty with an election not yet certified. We're sitting with a president that won't let go. We're sitting not knowing who will hold the power in the Senate. We're sitting with not knowing what's going to happen in our communities over the next few months, not knowing whether there'll be violence, not knowing whether there'll be civil unrest. And we have to acknowledge that some of us, or maybe many of us, sit in contentious times with our families and our friends, maybe, where these deep divides have grown larger. So I don't say that to be a downer or move us to a more hopeless place, not at all. I say it as a witness to what is right now, in part. And for us to not have to push away from that, but to be able to somehow learn to find peace and balance and have joy, even when that's part of the context. So I know, as Abby mentioned in the introduction, that you all have been working hard for civility, for justice, for competence, and for democracy. And that's hard work. It's noble work and it's hard work. And so Abby invited me here today to, at a time where maybe just for a moment, we can take some time to rest. Because in hard work isn't sustained without rest and refueling. It just isn't. And somehow in our culture, we've lost sight of that in many ways, I think. So today, I want to be a real voice for the rest and refueling that each of our bodies and minds need for the long distance. And for me personally, the tool of mindfulness has been probably the biggest support in my journey of learning to include rest and refueling in the work that I find so important to do. So I'm hoping to share that with you today. 12 years ago 12 years ago now? No, maybe only 8 years ago, I left a university position. I was an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Georgia. And I left because in my studies and in my research, and I stumbled across mindfulness and started practicing. And as I started practicing, I saw exactly how powerful it was. And so the classes I taught began to change, and I began to teach things like clinical application of neurobiology and mindfulness. And slowly everything began to have the focus of mindfulness. And then I chose to leave that position so that I could do this full time. I tell you that story, not really as a way to introduce me, but as a way to emphasize how much power I think this tool has when we incorporate it into our regimen of self-care. And so that's what I want to share with you today. I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint at the risk of being a little too academic, but hopefully it will be useful to you to just sort of follow along. And I really invite you just to sit back and rest and just take this in as we move through this. And I'll move perhaps back and forth between being in view with all of us and then the PowerPoint. So let me just get this started. Okay, it won't let me shift it. Ah, here we go. There we go. All right. So just briefly, we don't have a lot of time together today, but for the next about hour, a little bit more than an hour, I want to try to focus on three content areas. The first is an exploration of mindfulness. And then the second is an examination of stress. And in particular, I really want to talk about the human autonomic nervous system, because when we're trying to find balance, we're trying to find calm in the midst of a storm, what we're really trying to do is calm our nervous system. And that's the usefulness in mindfulness. And so I'd like to end then to talk a little bit about how can we use mindfulness to do this in our daily lives. So I think it's ambitious, but I'm hopeful that maybe we can work our way through this and then also have some time for conversation. So before we go any further, actually, I would love to shift from sort of intellectually exploring mindfulness and actually get to the heart of the practice. One thing I learned very early from my teacher, John Kabat-Zinn, was that mindfulness has very little value, if any, when it's just understood intellectually. Might be a interesting conversation at a cocktail party for about 5 minutes, but that's about it. It really has its value in the practice. So I would love for you all to join me in just a brief mindfulness meditation, which all that is required of you is to relax and just to follow the guidance. And then we'll have just a little bit of time to talk about it when we finish. So here's the instructions. And maybe some of you have already practiced mindfulness, so this may not be new, but I would invite you just to put down anything that you have in your hands. If you're sitting in a chair or on a couch, just to put both feet on the floor. That's our most grounded seated posture. And find a seated posture that's relaxed, but also engaged. So we're not checking out, we're actually checking in. And I'll use the sound of 3 bells, and we'll just allow our hearing to follow the sound of the 3 bells as a way to begin to orient us to the present moment. And many people prefer to meditate with their eyes closed. I do. But if that's not comfortable for you, feel free to just hold a soft gaze, really not looking at anything, casting the eyes down. And we'll begin with the sound of 3 bells. So as the bells fade away, I'd first just invite you to bring your full attention to the sitting posture. So just noticing the felt sense of the head resting on the body and the body resting on the chair. And bringing our attention all the way down to our feet and just taking a moment to sense into the pressure as the feet make contact with the ground. Noticing the backs of the legs and the bottom and the small of the back. Making contact and being supported by the chair. Sensing the upright position of the torso, the spine. Bringing awareness to the shoulders, allowing them just to relax. The arms to be loose, and the hands to soften a little bit. The neck and the head to relax, and just to feel the weight of the body, the solidity. And now that we've just taken a couple of minutes to really come into the body, I now want to invite you to shift your attention and just to take a moment to notice the mind. Just notice if there are any thoughts that are currently running through the mind. And no need to analyze them or judge them. This is just the simple practice of noticing what's going on in the thoughts right now. And just as we can pretty quickly notice what the content of our thoughts are, we can also take a moment just to notice if there are any feelings, any emotions or mood that's present right now. Anything that gets your attention. And now that we've just taken a moment to notice where the mind is, I now invite you to shift and bring your full attention into the breath. So just making connection with the breath wherever that's most comfortable for you, most natural. And wherever that is, whether it's at the nostrils or the chest or the abdomen, just expanding awareness just to follow the breath all the way, the whole in-breath and the whole out-breath. Just letting awareness receive and follow. There's nothing to control, nothing to make happen. It's just to feel the breath, all of the movements of the body as the body breathes. And if the mind is still busy, perhaps somewhere in the past or in the future, just invite it back to the breath, cultivating this awareness. You can invite it back as many times as you catch it leaving, just coming back to the breath. And as we bring our attention to the breath, we begin to possibly notice the mind and body connecting. The breath can only be experienced in the very presence of this moment. And now as you continue to bring awareness to the breath, feeling, sensing it moving in and out, I'd invite you to begin to expand awareness back to include the entire body, from the top of the head all the way down to the bottom of the feet. So that we're resting in this awareness of the body sitting, breathing, mind and body connected, right here. Nothing really to do, nowhere else to be. Just sitting, breathing, resting, refueling. And so as we end this meditation, I would want to invite you just to not come out of it too quickly and to maybe take a moment just to notice now what's primary. What do you notice internally? What's most alive right now? It might be a feeling. It might be noticing the energy. And if you all are open to this, I'd love to use our chat function just to write a couple of words of what's most present for you right now in the body. And there's no right or wrong. It might be calm, might be more anxious. And again, this isn't about judging or analyzing, simply noticing what's here. So space. Thank you, Jan. Tired. Clear mind and sleepiness. Surrender. Thirsty. Noticing the body. Peaceful. Would be easeful. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. Relaxation. Restful. Guiltiness. And I don't presume to know, Jennifer, what that refers to, but I do know it is often the case for many of us when we let ourselves rest, that there is an automatic pushback to that internally. A lot of us got messages that there's no time to rest. Peace, anxiety, equilibrium. Yes. Me too, Jennifer. Yeah. Thank you all. So when we come back to this at the end, we'll have a little time to talk about this if this would be useful. So I'm going to switch back now for a minute to the PowerPoint. And I want to just name what we just did. What's the most important is what you felt, what was embodied in your experience, but to add the cognitive cerebral piece to it. There's two things that happen as we sit in mindfulness meditation. We begin to train the mind and we begin to know the mind much more intimately. And in terms of beginning to train the mind, what we're really doing is we are training the attentional and concentration systems in our human brain. So whatever the object of awareness is, and we just went through a meditation where we started with the body as the object of awareness, and we moved, we took a quick look at the mind just to see what's here right now, because whatever's in the mind is always influencing our relationship to what's happening external to us, always. A lot of times it operates as a ticker tape, sort of like on CNN, and you barely even notice it. And a lot of times we don't notice it, but it's always influencing, always operating. So as we begin to train the mind, we train this attentional system. And as our attention and concentration grow from just the simple act of noticing when the mind leaves and escorting it back to the object of awareness, we're strengthening that. And the interesting thing that neuroscientists, especially Richie Davidson in the lab in Wisconsin, has found that as our attention and concentration systems become more advanced. The other thing that happens is we gain more empathy and compassion, which I find is a very interesting finding, but it also makes complete sense when we think about it. I want to invite you to think about the last time you gave somebody in your life your undivided attention, where if there was a lot going on in the mind, you set it aside and you paid very close attention to maybe what they were saying, what their nonverbals were, what they needed. Maybe it was a child or a grandchild or friend. But did you not also begin to feel more compassion as you really heard them? As you set aside your own stories about what was happening, your own narrative, your own preconceived ideas, which we all walk through the world with. But as you set them aside and you were very attentive, I bet compassion also arose. So this is part of what we're training the mind for. We're also, as the mind is trained and as the mind becomes still, calmer, what we also begin to see is where our mind spends so much time. What is it that's happening out there? Most of us, it's funny, but when you ask people, how mindful are you? You give them the definition, they're like, oh yeah, I'm pretty present. And then you ask somebody that started practicing mindfulness meditation, they're like, oh my God, I'm never here. Most of the time our mind flip-flops between remembering something from the past, worrying or planning something about the future, but it doesn't land here very often. Or when it does, it starts to be really judgmental. Okay, so here I am, but this moment could be better if fill in the blank. So as we practice mindfulness meditation, we start to see and have insight into all of this activity. We also begin to notice how conditioned it is, how habitual it is. And this is a good thing, because only once we begin to see it can we begin to also let it go, over and over and over. And we also start to understand what let it go means. It means come back to the present moment where life is actually happening right here. And then the last, you'll see this concept up here called beginner's mind. And this is one of my favorites. Every moment is actually a new moment. That's not cliche, that's real. Every cell in our body is changing. Every moment, the conditions shift ever so slightly to produce a new situation. But that's not how we go through life. We go through life on autopilot. And it's useful because what our brain wants us to do is adapt so that we use the least energy possible. And that's what autopilot is. That's what habituation is. So we come into a situation and the mind on some level goes, been there, done that. I don't really have to pay attention to this. And so we enter into it as if we already know it, which is a real opportunity to also invite boredom in, as well as lots of other things.
Go lay down in your bed. Chilly, go in your bed.
We may have a mute. There we go. So beginner's mind is this ability to actually pause and step into a moment with freshness, with new eyes, new ears, dropping the preconceived notions. It creates a vibrancy in life that isn't there when we're walking through life on autopilot. And it's a beautiful ability to cultivate. So that's what we were just doing on a level that many of us aren't aware of while we're doing it. So we want to make sure, actually, before we go any further, that we are on the same page in terms of mindfulness. As probably all of us are aware, mindfulness has become an incredibly popularized concept. Not as much practice, but certainly concept in our culture. And so with that, anytime that happens, there's a lot of conceptual drift. So I want to use the definition again that my teacher used, who I was trained by, and that's Jon Kabat-Zinn. And this definition is paying attention on purpose to the present moment without judgment. And I said this just a minute ago, but I'll say it again. A lot of times we think that's easy until we actually start trying to do it. My experience over the last 8 years of teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction is what happens is, first, most people realize, oh, I'm actually not that present. Okay. And then as they begin to train the mind to be more present, slowly those shifts start to happen. They're experiencing more of the actual life that's here. And then they notice that sneaky inner critic. And this is the last part of that definition. We learn to be present, but then we have to unlearn how to be judgmental so that we're more open, a little freer, a little more peaceful. So this is the task, and this is the task, to learn to be mindful. I want to take a minute to also say what mindfulness isn't, because I think there are a lot of myths out there. First of all, it's never about having a blank mind. As a human being with a brain and a frontal cortex in particular, we will never have a blank mind without, I'm guessing, a lobotomy. That's not my area of interest, but I think that's about as close as we'd get. So, one of the primary jobs, if you will, of the prefrontal cortex is to make meaning of this life constantly. And so we're always going to have thought. It's always going to be in operation during the day, in thought, during the night, in dreams. So what mindfulness meditation helps us is it helps to change our relationship to those thoughts. It never ends in a blank mind. But we learn to have a different relationship. We see thought for what it is, thought, not as an ultimate truth. It's not about going into a trance. It's not a relaxation technique, even though one of the consequences is relaxation. It's a focusing technique. It's not mysterious. It's not for everyone. Matter of fact, at the University of Pennsylvania, I believe there is still ongoing training for people with diagnoses of psychotic disorders like schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. And training in mindfulness, training to see the delusions for what they are, just like we need to train to see our delusions, even if they're not psychotic. It's not running away from reality. It's very much about getting very real with reality. It's not a way to get high. It's not about becoming emotionless. It's not selfish. And I use this analogy a lot. I say to my participants in MBSR, it's just like on a plane. If you have your children on a plane and something happens and there's a crash situation, they always say, put your oxygen mask on first. You will be much more centered to help your children. And I feel that way about mindfulness. The calmer we become, the more centered we become, the better parents we are, the better partners we are, the better coworkers we are, etc. I don't think it's selfish. I do think it's self-care. It's not about sitting around having lofty thoughts. It's not about withdrawing from life, quite the opposite. It's not about seeking bliss, and it's certainly not about escaping pain. And actually, before we started our call today, Valerie and I were engaged in a conversation, and Valerie, I know you mentioned that your work had been with pain clinic. And this is where MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, got its start, right? Helping people with chronic pain develop a more compassionate, accepting relationship with the pain sensations that they could not control in their body. So it's not about escaping pain. It is about changing our relationship. to emotional and physical pain. I think it's worth saying a couple of sentences about the human mind. Typically, when we think of the human mind, first of all, we think the mind is the processing of the brain. Dan Siegel has a definition. It's the energy and information flow from one neuron to the next. So, but we often think about the mind synonymously with thinking and feeling. And in our culture, we get a lot of training in thinking. And the thinking mind, obviously, is of great use. Luckily, we have scientists right now who are trying to find a vaccine for this pandemic that we're in. I'm grateful for the thinking mind. But we have been very imbalanced in our culture. We've given great support, great educational support to the thinking mind, but we haven't really had any formal training for this second and very important capacity of the human mind, and that's awareness. We really haven't had a training ground for awareness. And I think that's why mindfulness became so quickly popular in our culture 35, 40 years ago, is because it is actually a formal training to train this very important capacity of the human mind, awareness. And that's what we're doing with mindfulness. We're training our capacity of conscious awareness, not consciousness. Many of us will attest that you've driven from point A to point B a million times in your life, and occasionally you're like, wow, I don't even remember that drive. Now, clearly you were conscious, but you weren't aware of driving. It was so autopilot. So what we're cultivating here is that intentional awareness. And I want to make a distinction, because a lot of things that we hear in our culture is be mindful. A lot of people say that a lot. It's amazing, even like in a couple of work situations that I'm in, like on boards, I'll hear people say, well, let's be mindful about that. And that's a beautiful invitation. But to be quite honest, because the brain wants us to go to autopilot, it's actually very challenging to be mindful. And so we can learn to be mindful in our life, but we have to practice it. And most often when we're talking about practicing mindfulness, we're really talking about setting out a particular amount of time each day, 15, 20, 30 minutes, to engage in mindful meditation. That's the training ground. It's sort of like you wouldn't get up, you wouldn't go to the starting line of a marathon if you hadn't spent a long time training and building up, right? You wouldn't just go run a marathon, or somebody would have to pick me up after probably 200 yards. So it's the same thing. We're training our mind to be present, to be in the race of life, if you will. So wait, before we get to stress, let me just say one last thing about mindfulness. So just to sum this up, mindfulness is a tool. It's available to all of us. It takes discipline in the form of carving out the time to practice, but that's it. The rest of the striving most of us naturally do in life, we get to let go of during that time, just like I hope you did when we practiced together a few minutes ago. That there's nothing to do once you're there. It's actually the opposite. It's to learn for just a few minutes to not do, to be, to touch in to the whole embodied presence. And it turns out that we have a lot of good science now that tells us this is a really important activity to engage in for the health and well-being of our autonomic nervous systems. And so that's where I want to switch now and just spend hopefully about 15 minutes just talking a little bit about. There's a lot of ways to talk about stress, and this is just one way I want to come at this concept, because I think a lot of us are feeling it right now. Stress is not all bad. For example, in my life before, I had a degree in exercise physiology, and there's a whole theory around moderate stress being very useful for athletic performance, for example. That's true. But what I'm talking about here is the stress on the human mind and body, this resulting tension and contraction that we feel that is a result of being in adverse situations or very demanding circumstances. So I want to pause here again and just ask you all just to maybe close your eyes for just a moment and remember back, and you might not have to remember that far back, but when was the last time you felt stressed? And if you can, just remember it, remember the situation, the details. And then pay attention to your body, specifically this median channel, the throat, the chest, the abdomen. As you remember this stressful situation, what does the body experience? So just inviting you to hold that for just a moment, just that knowledge of what's in the body as we talk about this next part. Here's what is not controversial among scholars, researchers, is that this negative type of stress wreaks havoc on our bodies and brains. An unchecked, unregulated autonomic nervous system is not in the service of well-being. So I love this. Some of you may be familiar with Rick Hanson. He's written a number of books. One was Buddha Brain, and his latest is Neurodharma. He's a neuropsychologist. And I really appreciate the way he talks about this. And basically, our nervous system began to develop at the same time the rest of our human brain did. As we moved from being on all fours to becoming these bipedal Homo sapiens that we eventually became, that was the environment our stress system was developing in. And it developed really well and did a very good job, or we all wouldn't be fortunate enough to be on this call right now. And it developed in an environment that is radically different from our environment that we live in right now. We lived in an environment then which was much more natural. It didn't have all of it, didn't have 24-hour a day ability for light, for example, that makes us able to work all the time. It was very natural. And so for the most part, it was quite serene until danger hit. And so we developed a nervous system that had an aspect of it that could very fast, way before our conscious ability, tune into that danger and do the best it can to take care of us so that we can survive. The rest of the time, to chill out. And so Rick Hanson talks about, basically, we lived by one rule. It was to eat lunch today, not to be lunch today, right? That was it. We want to eat lunch. We don't want to be lunch. And it worked really well. But again, I'll say, that's not how we live now. Now, we live in environments that constantly have a vibration to it that is at a higher stress level. I remember hearing recently, or within the last year or so, 2 years maybe, that New York City was attempting to pass a law that required ambulances and other emergency vehicles to change the tone of the siren because there was such an increase in hearing loss and deafness among residents. And that sort of encapsulates to me what we're talking about. You know, those of us especially that live in the cities, we live in very alive places that are alive 24 hours a day. And so our nervous systems are already a little bit heightened. So, but we have this nervous system. So let's talk about it for just a second. So the autonomic nervous system, and I'm going to really simplify this. So I apologize to any scientists, physicians, anybody else that would like to hear more specificity. I really just want to talk about this in a way that allows us to work with our own mind and body. But we have this autonomic nervous system, and it has two branches. It has a sympathetic branch and a parasympathetic branch. And I tend to think about it like a car. You know, if you taught your kids how to drive, or if you remember learning how to drive, we had to basically learn that there was a brake and a gas, and they were complementary. They didn't operate together. If we had the gas on, the brake was off. If the brake was on, the gas needed to be off. And maybe some of you watched as kids struggled with that, and they'd put the brake on and then rev the gas. And what happens is the engine keeps revving up with nowhere to go. And if you don't stop, eventually it breaks down, right? Well, this is our nervous system. So it's intended, the vast majority of the time, for us to be parasympathetically dominant, like the brakes are on. And Rick Hansen calls this the rest and digest system. And I love that, because think about like when you've had like a delicious meal, you haven't overeaten, you just tasted really good food. You're comfortably satisfied and you're at ease. That's sort of the parasympathetic service. My guess is most of us right now are parasympathetically dominant. When we're parasympathetically dominant, we are at our best. Everything, there's vertical integration, like cortex, limbic system, hindbrain, body is all aligned, so that Marsha Linehan, who's a psychologist, talks about wise mind, so that the aspects of our rational mind and the aspects of our emotional mind are all working together for our best. And we feel pretty good. And we rarely say things and do things that aren't in our best interest when we're parasympathetically dominant. We're usually good to others and good to ourselves. But we have this other branch of our brain called the sympathetic branch. And it's our fight or flight system. And basically, this system gets activated when a part of our brain registers danger. And as soon as it registers danger, it activates this system because it's attempting to take care of us. It's a good system. It works. But what has progressively happened for us in our culture is the brain is making a mistake. It's registering danger when actually what is it being experienced is discomfort. We're not comfortable. We don't like what's happening. We're actually, somebody said something to us that wasn't kind. Doesn't make it right. It's just we're not actually in danger. But it gets flipped on, or somebody passes us really fast on 285 and it scares us. But we're actually not in danger. We're very uncomfortable. But now the sympathetic nervous system is activated and we're revved up. And, at the worst case scenario, it ends with road rage, right? So the brain keeps making these mistakes in certain ways because the conditions of the moment aren't great. We're not present. We're not really already aligned. So just to bring this home again, we have these two branches. When we're truly in danger, we want that sympathetic branch to act, and it will. We won't stop that. It's below the control of the cortex. It's below conscious control. But what we really want to be in operation most of the time is the parasympathetic branch. When we're parasympathetically dominant, we are intentional, we're comforted, we have enhanced functioning, and we have lots of choice. But as soon as we start activating that sympathetic system, we start to get more and more reactive, more and more stressed, and all of the functioning, especially our executive functioning, decision making, starts to be rendered ineffective. And we don't have a lot of choice. We're just going to yell, or we're just going to run away. So this is where mindfulness comes in, because one of the greatest findings about what happens to us while we're sitting in mindfulness meditation is that we are strengthening the parasympathetic nervous system. And if you think about it, I don't know if you had this experience while we were just meditating together, but at a certain point I said, if you notice your mind wandering off to the future or to the past, just bring it back gently. We don't have to judge it. We don't have to, just bring it back. It's that movement of noticing and coming back that strengthens this parasympathetic system. Because usually where the mind has gone has a teeny bit of reactivity in it. Usually it's something we're not happy with, we wish we had done differently, or we're kind of worried about the future and, oh my gosh, is it going to be okay? And you can feel the activation. And when we notice that and just come back, we're diminishing that sympathetic reactivity and stabilizing the mind. So I like to say that mindfulness meditation is like giving your parasympathetic nervous system a lovely bath. So there are absolutely ways that we can train our parasympathetic system, train our overall autonomic system, so that we cultivate this ability to remain calm when our external environment isn't necessarily imminently dangerous. Imminent is an operative word there. When it's not imminently dangerous, but we don't like it. There are ways we can train our mind, our nervous systems to stay steady, to be as intentional and open as possible, so that we are as wise as possible. The first is taking 5-minute pauses multiple times a day, where you just take a break. But it isn't just to take a break and check out, it's to take a break and check in, to really engage in that process. The breath is an ideal object of awareness for many people. It's free, it's always there. We don't have to remember to carry it with us, and it doesn't require our control. Matter of fact, we should all be grateful we're not in control of the breath, or we would probably all be dead because we'd forget to breathe. It just breathes on its own. So it's a wonderful object. The next is to do something even a little bit more intentional within the activity, and that is 10 breaths with emphasis on exhalation. Now, so the breath is the conduit to the nervous system. And I just invite you to do this with me for just a second. Just take 3 quick inhales, just, and notice what you feel in the body. Notice if you don't feel some energy arising. Like it's an alert. It's an alert oriented activity, the in breath. Now breathe in and then breathe out, focusing on the out breath. Focus awareness on the out breath. Just do that one more time. When you focus your attention on the out breath, what do you feel in your body? Doesn't it feel grounding, like there's a calming? That's the activation of the parasympathetic system. So when we stop what we're doing and just take 10 breaths, count 1 in, 1 out, but emphasizing the out. And there's a great line. See for yourself. All of these practices are see for yourself. See if it's useful. See if it's helpful. The next one is really my favorite. I love this as much as I have had a daily meditation practice for 14 or 15 years now. This is actually my favorite, and that's practicing everyday mindfulness. So what this means is you can do it each week. So at the beginning of the week, you decide what activity do you do every day that you commit to doing mindfully. Maybe showering, maybe brushing your teeth, maybe making the coffee, whatever it is, walking your dog. And for that activity, the moment you start it to the very moment you end it, your whole intention is to keep coming back to the sensory experience of the activity. Now, what do I mean by that? The present moment is felt through our senses. It's what we can see, what we can hear, what we can taste, what we can touch, what we can smell. It doesn't really happen in the thinking mind. As soon as we're thinking about the present moment, we're a nanosecond out of it. So when we practice everyday mindfulness, let's say we say we're going to take a shower. So, or let's use brush your teeth. So we're going to brush our teeth. So the minute I pick up my toothbrush, I start to feel the coolness of the handle in my hand. I notice undoing the toothpaste. I smell the toothpaste. I feel it in my mouth. It's everything that's sensory. I had a dentist in my class one time to ask me if I would come and do this in his waiting room because he thought his patients would brush their teeth much better if they were doing it mindfully. And he's probably right, we would. I remember when I started doing this, I used showering. And I tell this a lot because it was so powerful to me. One, before I started, it became clear to me that I used the shower as an argument simulator. I went through my day while I was showering, seeing what conversations I was going to have and which ones probably would be difficult, and thinking my way through them. Meanwhile, my stress was growing because anything you're thinking about that isn't actually here, there's nothing you can do about. So you're rendered powerless, which powerlessness increases stress. So we think we're doing a good thing by thinking about it all the time, but we're actually increasing our stress. So I was increasing my stress. And the other thing that would happen on a routine basis was did I shampoo my hair? Did I not shampoo my hair? And I'd end up shampooing my hair 2 or 3 times a day. So I'm convinced that I ended up saving money on shampoo when I started getting mindful. The other thing that actually happened that was quite beautiful and was my first sort of taste of the connection between mindfulness and gratitude was I paid attention to the fact that not only did I have clean water at the tip of my finger, I had warm water, which put me in direct awareness with the fact that there are many people in our country alone that don't have access to warm water, don't have access to clean water, safe water. And so there was enormous gratitude and awareness. So there's lots that can come out of our learning, practicing, cultivating presence. And then the last recommendation I would have is to learn to meditate, is to pick up a practice and see what happens. And I usually say, if you're interested, if this touches you, if it resonates with you, and you're like, yeah, I want to give that a try, commit to doing it consistently every day, even when you don't want to, for 30 days. And then judge at the end of the 30 days. But it requires some time. But I've never had anybody come back to me and say, yeah, that was a waste of time. Never. Not in all these years. So the last thing I will end with before I open it up for some conversation is I just wanted to offer you all some concrete supports. So if this speaks to you and you think, yeah, I'd give this a shot. I'd give a meditation practice a shot. There are 3 links on this slide, and I don't know how I can get you all these slides. I'll figure that out with Valerie or Abby or somebody, but there are hyperlinks in here, so they'll take you to these places. But Insight Timer is an app. It's a great app. It's also a very large app at this time. But I have all my guided meditations, which are only mindfulness meditations. They're not something else that doesn't really have much scientific background or isn't for the purpose of focusing the mind. They're mindfulness, and they're here, and you can use those. And I will go one step further to say, if you think about doing this and you're like, yeah, I want to do this, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to email you back a structured approach to starting with a particular meditation and doing that one for a week, and then doing the next one for another week. And it will take you out to 6 weeks of meditations. And so my contact information, all you have to do is go to Atlanta Mindfulness Institute's website, and my email is on that page, on the About page, and just shoot me an email, and I'm happy to do that. I would love to be able to do that with you. The second option is every Sunday we run a Sunday meditation group, mindfulness meditation group from 6 to 7. It's open to the community. We have a 30-minute guided meditation, and then I give a little talk for about 15 minutes on an aspect of supporting practice, and then we have a few minutes for discussion. We meet every Sunday evening, and I would love for anybody that's interested to come join us. It's totally donation-based, so you just register and come, and we send you a Zoom link. And then the third support would be mindfulness-based stress reduction. And I don't actually have a class until next February coming up, but it is an 8-week class. It is an enormous amount of support. And it really takes you through a very, very deep dive into developing a lifelong mindfulness meditation practice and mindfulness in your everyday life. So I just wanted to offer those 3 as supports. And I think that's actually a good place to end. So I am going to stop share and just open it up to any questions or thoughts. And if you want to just kind of wave your hand so we can orient to your box, and then you can just unmute yourself, I think. Yeah. Yeah, Sherry.
Hi, I don't know if you saw, I just put the question in the chat. I've been meditating since I was about 10, and on and off sort of transcendental meditation. We used to do it twice a day. Now it's pretty much, I do it when I wake up in the morning before I even get out of bed. When do you feel is the most efficient or, useful time to meditate?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. Thank you, Sherry. I think that is so individually based. I'm very much a morning person. It is not virtuous, but I am up at 5 a.m. every morning like clockwork, and it's just my biological clock. And I'm grateful because that puts me up before anybody else in the house. And so I get a cup of coffee very mindfully. I love coffee. And then the next thing I do is go sit. I do that because that's my most alert time. I'm most awake. And so I benefit the most. But you know, my best friend of 30 years meditates at 10 p.m. at night. I have no idea how she does that. I would be asleep within 30 seconds. So Sherry, I think it really is you've had a meditation practice a long time, so you probably have experimented with different times a day. But what I would encourage people is to do that kind of experimenting at different times a day and see when are you most awake, most alert. I have lots of people that do it in their car when we used to go to an office, when they go to their office, they'd go in their car and meditate at lunch. I had a gynecologist that would go in at 7 a.m. and she told her practice manager, don't tell anybody I'm here until 8 a.m. And she had 5 kids at home. That's the only time she could do it. That was her commitment. So it's so based on our lifestyle and our biological clocks.
But the key is to do it when you're aware and alert, not when you're still trying to get out of bed. Okay.
Yeah. I say to
Okay.
people, one of the things that happens for people when they start to meditate is they get really sleepy because we're all so exhausted. I mean, really, it's like it is often for many people like a wake-up call that, whoa, my body is absolutely exhausted. And we're a culture that when we're standing, we're supposed to be working. And then when we're lying down, we're supposed to be out of it. And so in meditation, we're trying to actually learn to relax and stay alert. And it takes a while sometimes for the body to kind of get into that. So that's why I say as best you can, because this practice isn't to go to sleep, even though there's a lot of research that shows people that start meditating, mindfulness meditation, their insomnia decreases greatly. And I think it's because we're strengthening that parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. So we're just quieting the mind more.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Joni.
Well, I meditate on and off, more off than on, but unfortunately, but is it okay I find that counting, like as I'm breathing in and breathing out, I stay much more focused if I count. Does that like a bad thing to do, or is it okay? I feel guilty because they gave us a chant to do and that didn't work for me.
Yeah, no, thank you. Absolutely. It's fine to count. This is what I always say to people. You know, most of us, either at the beginning of a meditation practice or if we have kind of an on or off practice, we just get in touch with the instability of the mind, right? And so counting is a fine way to bring that stabilization, but just don't get too attached to it, because if after a while you won't need it. And so then just let it go. But for as long as it feels like it's useful to keep bringing you back, yeah, absolutely, it's fine. Just watch, because everything changes and your brain will be changing too. And if you do this steadily, after a while, you just won't need it.
Be great. Thanks.
Yeah, Rosalind.
You know, growing up in the 60s, I tried transcendental meditation when it first came out and was never able to get it out of my head, never able to get out of my head to sufficiently meditate. I have found that as I've gotten older, it's a little easier, but my question is really not so much about meditation, but about this time we're living in now. And I have found myself, I'm not an angry person, and I have found myself like being very angry a lot. And what is your suggestion? I guess I have to get more of my parasympathetic nervous system, but.
Yeah, I mean, first I want to validate that I think there's a lot of things to be angry about, first of all. I mean, right? I mean, and part of living truthfully is turning toward our own emotions and but what I find useful is to really develop a clear awareness of the difference between what is actually happening and how my head is either making it worse or not. And that's a really important distinction, because often when we find something that's unjust, we add to it, and we can really get going. And that's that nervous system. The nervous system that gets ramped up wants to stay ramped up. And so, one, I say, let's validate the anger, which doesn't mean add to it. It just means turn toward it, breathe with it, befriend it. And then once we do that, really, Rosalind, I find that everything calms down enough to know what's wise, what's needed. Because, you know, every great spiritual leader, for example, says anger is a normal emotion, human emotion. It's just not the greatest place to act from, right? That ultimately, when we take action, we do so much better when we can take action from a place of balanced love, intention. Like, we can actually do the work we need to do without hating the other. And it's called, commitment to our own values, commitment to what is just. But it's tricky, and it's a work in progress for me, always, always.
Thank you.
So I think we've got about 3 more minutes. Yeah, Elaine, please.
Can you hear me? Because this headphones is a little bit weird.
Perfectly.
Okay. I'm just wondering, is it okay? Is it good, bad, neutral to just want to do a guided meditation and that's it? Like, I mean, people tell me, even my daughter, that she just meditates. She just sits there. And I feel like I'm either, like you were talking about, going to fall asleep or I'll just get bored or whatever. You know, is it okay if you always rely on the guided meditation?
100%.
Okay.
So just one of the things that we do, that we start to see when we start to watch our mind, is how often we see through the lens of right, wrong, good, bad, when we don't need to. Like, most of the things in life, we don't actually need to apply that lens, but we do. We do it over and over. All of us do it over and over and over. So it is neither good or bad, Elaine. It's so important just to know what's needed right now for me, for this mind, for this body. And for example, in MBSR, I would never start people out with just silent meditation, not because it's bad, but because most of us, you put us in a room with our mind with nothing else, no voice, no nothing, and we're going to run. I would. And so we start out with guided as an important point in the journey. Now, even though I said that, it doesn't mean you're further along in the journey if you sit silently and watch your own mind. It doesn't. There things are needed at different times. There was a time I went through where there was a lot of loss and death in my life, and I was so grateful to return to guided meditation that really brought me a lot of groundedness and support. And so there's times in life, there's the journey, but mostly it's, what do you need?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Abby. Hey, Abby.
Hi, we need to stop. I am deeply grateful to Stephanie for sharing your wisdom and for introducing this community to mindfulness meditation. This is not a plug. This is just sort of an honest witnessing to how powerful it's been in my life. And I just want to share that with everybody. So however you can find a way of incorporating this in your life, I really encourage you to do it. And I will tell you that, having taken actually several workshops with Stephanie, it helped me to develop a practice. And the plus of it was that you do it with a group of people, maybe 30 people, and you get to hear their wisdom and how they're experiencing it. And it normalizes so much of what we as human beings go through. So thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for all the work that we're all doing. And I hope that with meditation and the work we're doing, we'll make the world a slightly better place.
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right.
Really lovely to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.